So, Bria, we, in our exploration of the topics that we explore ourselves in self-directed education and in supporting other families and learning centers and schools or whatever it might be, um, especially with family, but also really any kind of community setting, the topic of chores always comes up, right? So we decided we would do a short video on our thinking and experience and how to, um, yeah, I guess how to go about being in a community and having our needs around chores, which are often different from kids, um, and how do we negotiate that, right? So, what in your own experience and in your coaching with others, um, how do you usually frame that and approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I would always start from a place of every family is going to be different, which we all know, and every kid's going to be different. So, what works for me may not necessarily work for your family. What works right now might change when kids are older. It's vastly different, I think, with like 4-year-olds doing chores compared to like talking to teenagers about chores. And I almost dislike the word chores for that reason too, because it's
Mhm.
almost like this job we're giving to the younger people in the house to uphold something we decided they should uphold. I think if you reframe it to be like the family has all these things in the house that need to get done to take care of our environment for us to live together, like we all use dishes, we all use the living room, whatever it is. Then it's really about like environmental care so we can all feel comfortable,
Mhm.
and meet each other's level of comfort too with what's going on in the house. I also would always say keep rewards and punishment out of it. Like if rewards and punishment is the thing you have to do to get a kid to do a chore, you should probably give up on the chore for a while, um, because that's going to be a lasting effect, that they're only going to do something for you or for the family because they see something in it for them or because they will get punished if they don't, and they're not really seeing the greater picture of like responsibility to taking care of each other, mutual respect. It's just about I'm going to get that sticker or I'm going to get that candy or whatever it is. So I would always take the rewards and punishments out of it.
Mhm.
That being said, I mean, over here we don't do chores really, but because of the relationship we've developed where it's like we really want to take care of each other no matter how old the person is, like I can ask my stepson to do something for me on the fly and he usually will do it, and usually it's a super reasonable request or I'll explain like why and he'll usually do it in that moment. But the like set routine of like you have to empty the dishwasher every day doesn't work for him. Like he's not remembering it, it's not in his routine, that's not what's worked in our house. But you need that, like for any chore system or any sharing responsibility system to work, you need that baseline of mutual respect for each other, which I know we've talked a lot about in other situations. But I have a ton more I could say. I'm going to pause so you can say a little bit more about what you do in your house and how you would approach this.
Yeah, no, I think that's all good stuff. I mean, I think, you know, there are definitely some universals that, or I think there are some universals in terms of my work with other families and also in kind of learning center spaces or really any community space around, you know, when you said you know, whether you have set kind of routines or whether there's somebody who kind of conducts and asks, like I see that being different, but what I see being consistent everywhere is if you frame it around, hey, what are everybody's needs and hopes for our shared spaces, and all of that, and how do we come to a way of help, you know, best we can meeting everybody's shared and individual needs, like that I see as a universal that works really well, instead of having it be like, hey, parents set the guidelines and then it's just a way of getting the kids to do it. For me, that's kind of a universal. And when you mentioned respect, it also seems to be a universal for me that if it's about getting getting everybody to do one person's or one set of people's needs and not wondering or caring about, hey, what are your needs and what about your own personal space? If you have a disparity in respect, and I noticed that with my own kids, if I ask them to do something and I haven't been respecting their needs, just generally, they're gonna say no. And if I have been, they're gonna say yes. And that's a universal. I think that if there's general respect and care for each other's needs, um, and a clarity of where our shared needs are and where it's like I'm doing you a favor if I clean that thing, and therefore where's the kind of give and take around that. Then I see it working really well, whether it's a learning center, a school, a home. Um, yeah, it sits in an environment of kind of respect and equity of need. And that's where I see our chairs working. And by the way, what's the definition of work, right? If it's get kids to do what I want, and if I, threaten them enough, well, that worked.
Right.
But then it's also, as we've talked about so many times, causing some real potential damage to their ability to operate in the world in a way that feels good to them and others, if that's how we're training them to operate. So there's my, I'll see your long spiel with a long spiel. There you go.
Us in a nutshell, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Importance, you keep saying shared space. I think that importance of the shared spaces are things that all of our needs hold very equal weight, and then their own space or my own space, I get to decide what to do with that. I mean, I share rooms, so I don't necessarily, that's
Right.
still a shared space, but like for my stepson, his room is his room.
Mhm.
So if we keep battering on him about cleaning his room when it actually doesn't have much to do with us, we're losing a lot of that respect, and we're asking him to do something that doesn't have to do with our needs. Now, when his dishes pile up, or our shared dishes pile up in his room,
Mhm.
and we ask him to bring the dishes back because we're out of plates, he does understand how that's like a shared need to have dishes. So that feels really valid to both of us, that we would remind him to please bring his dishes back. It's not about his space being clean, it's about like our
Mhm.
resource that we use. But yeah, I think the more you put your needs onto someone else's space where you don't really have a right to do that, the less respect you're showing and the less respect you're going to get.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. If we expect that, um, if we assume that we have the ability to tell somebody else what to do in their room when it doesn't affect us, it's just I want your room to meet my aesthetic, then as I experience in so many ways, whenever we do something that is unjust, and
Mm,
kids are just incredible barometers for just and ness and fairness, they're gonna pay us back somewhere, because they pay their debts, right? Like with interest.
mm-hmm.
And if we're gonna do something that's just clearly not fair, like can they come into our room and tell us what to do with our space? No, so there's not equity there. They recognize when there's disparity. And even if it's not there, they're like, okay, you keep ragging on me to clean my room, I'm going to do it. But by the way, whenever I have power to disrupt something you want, I'm going to do it because there needs to be equity. And that's how I'm going to get it. And they
Yeah,
do get it. Even if we think we have power and we're getting them to do stuff, they will always find a way to get in our way if they can, to balance things out. And
yeah,
that's where we get a lot of the disruption and kind of defiance and all of that. I find that we're creating that by basically clean your room because I said so.
right.
So I think
Yeah,
it's a great point. And it's also a great example of how chores or care of space cannot be separate to the way we interact in other spaces. If I'm trying to be kind of equitable, et cetera, in chore space, but I'm authoritarian and commanding in other spaces, then it's in chore space that they're going to pay me back for that other space.
yeah,
um, yeah.
yeah. And that was his favorite tactic early on when we did fall into the the trap of saying, your room's really dirty, we'd like you to clean it, he would come in here and be like, your room's really dirty, why don't you have to clean your room? Which I love that he did that, because it was a very clear message, like, what are you talking about? This is my space. So do I get to say that about your space? It was a really clear message to us, and I very much appreciate that and how much it shifted things.
That's a rare thing for, I mean, it's, you know, it's actually a common thing, as you know, in kind of self-directed or kind of equity-based households or spaces, where you can tell you're there because, and that it's been made clear that that's the ethic of engagement, because kids will start calling you on disparity. Whereas
Yeah.
in most cases, the recognition is there of the disparity, but the vocabulary or the practice of talking about it and calling out is not there. And so that's when behavior becomes disruptive or defiant, because they don't, that's the tool they know to use to get at the disparity. Um, yeah, that's just a great example. And so many times, I know, I think we've talked about this before, but so many times families or parents or teachers will come back and say, oh my gosh, what have, I'm following like your advice, but now my kid is like calling me out on all of this stuff.
Good.
And, yeah, so I had a parent recently say, oh my gosh, my kid is constantly coming to me and saying, Mom, I have a need. And but she said it's also really changed how they're communicating about things. And the kid is now doing more of what she wants.
Mhm.
And she's just being clearer to make sure that she's addressing his needs as being just as important.
Yeah.
That leads me to something, I don't know if now's the time or maybe another topic, but I talk a lot about equity of need, and often people assume that that means that everybody's need has to be met all the time. And I
Mm.
think it's really important to call out here in this context that equity of need does not mean that. What it means is that we cannot assume in any conflict of need that ours is more important by default. That's all it means. It just
Mhm.
means that we need to negotiate on equal terms about those needs and not assume that ours is more important just because we're bigger or older or have more money in the bank. Anyway, just I think that that's really important to remember. It doesn't mean that if they don't want them to clean their room and I want them to clean their room, that like that idea of equity of need is broken, because how can you have both? It doesn't mean that. It just means that that I shouldn't assume they have to clean their room just because I'm bigger.
Yeah.
That's all it means.
Yeah. This
To
came
me,
up
anyway.
in a conversation I was having with someone the other day about, I'll throw out this example. Like, say you're in a learning or a community space, and there's some kids playing a game over here, and they're screaming, and there's an adult reading over here, and the adult yells to them, like, shut up, not shut up. They wouldn't say shut up, but like, stop screaming. And then
Mhm.
the kids had to stop screaming and move on. And how disrespectful that felt to witness. Like, yes, the kids are screaming, the adult is reading, but the way the adult handled it, how disrespectful it was, and how there are two needs there. Like, the person I was talking to was just flat out like, that's disrespectful, they shouldn't say that. But then I was bringing in the conversation of, well, there's a need from this adult who's reading, and there's a need from these kids who are screaming. And I think in order to talk about, like, the way you talk to an adult who is screaming is you'd walk up to them, you'd be like, hey, this is going on for me. What's
Mhm.
going on for you? How can we work this out? Maybe the adult goes to another room to read.
Mhm.
Maybe you can't read in that room right now. Maybe the kids go outside. Like, there's so many options. But to walk up to those kids and say, hey, that here's what's going on for me, what's going on for you, can we find something together that feels reasonable to meet all of our needs? And I think in that situation you can. Not everyone, but
Mhm.
that was a super clear example of just I feel like the adult saying my need takes precedence because I get to tell these kids to be quiet.
Yeah.
I'll stop. That's it.
No, I think it is a really good example, and it's, I mean, part of again, I think something to remember is that at least a principle that I use is that um, everything we say or do is with our kids or with kids is either teaching how to sort of coerce and use power. It's teaching something about power, right? And it's teaching something about relationship. And we're either teaching kind of domination and power, or we're teaching equity and influence. And in that case, I think, you know, it's clear what it's teaching depending on how you approach that. And it's clear that we are teaching kids that how you solve problems is that you use your power to coerce other people to do stuff when you have power. And if you don't have power, to go get it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really good example of an opportunity to teach something different. And chores are a great place to do that. I want the house clean. You know, I have a different level of definition of clean than you do. And therefore you must meet my definition of clean, is teaching, if you got power, use it, and whoever has the most power gets what they want. And if it's, hey, I have a different understanding of what clean means for our shared spaces than you do, how might we come to a place of understanding about a compromised way of dealing with that, that meets both of our needs as best we can and respects that we have those differences, which might mean that um, I do the difference between those levels of clean to get it to where I want it. But there might be another place where you would need to do more work to get things to where you need it, and I don't care as much, right? So it can bleed into, it's about, it's simplistic to say it, but it's kind of about give and take. And human beings being able to negotiate that is the skill that every, employer out there, I hate to always bring it back to work and all that, but wants people to be able to do. I mean, productivity is killed so much by human beings in shared workspaces not being able to negotiate those small things and turning to petty retribution. And I can promise you that they want to hire people that did chores based on an equitable kind of needs-based approach versus, do it or I will punish you. I guarantee you. So even if it's just because you want your kid to get a good job, do it this way. But really, it feels better to everybody involved, and the skills learned are better. And the chores just flat out get done more if
Mm-hmm.
they're done from a place of your need is just as important as mine. And let's talk about how we're going to do our best to meet the needs that I have, the needs that you have, and work from there.
Yeah, and done in a much less stressful way, because I feel like a lot of parents spend so much time and energy like negotiating and fighting and yelling and pushing kids to do chores, when really it'd be less energy to just do them themselves. So what are you really trying to get there? You're trying to get your kid to do something. I don't actually think it's about making it life easier for you, because it's so much harder to
Yeah.
fight for that.
And I think that's actually a really good point, Bria, because I know lots of parents who simply do revert to just doing it themselves because of how much work it is to get kids to
Right.
do things. And I guess if I had to choose between doing things myself and having to yell at my kids and threaten them to get them to do them, I guess I would just do them myself. But the thing is, it's not a choice between those two things. And it's so easy to get kids to do chores if you approach it through a place of talking about need and shared kind of responsibility and caring. It's so easy to get that, in my experience, and in working with others. And it actually does a huge disservice to kids to not expect them to be a responsible part of a community. It
Yep.
really does. It damages their ability to be a healthy member and to create healthy community in the future. And there are lots of, I think, there's lots of data to suggest that kids that do chores do better in life, just in general. but let's not use that as an excuse to force them to do chores, right?
Right. What kind of chores are they doing? How is it being done? How are
Exactly.
they to do
Yeah.
it? That's
How are
important.
we getting kids to do chores is much more important than them doing them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, yeah, that move to kind of permissiveness, as I would call it, which I define as the giving up of my need because
Mm-hmm.
it's just too hard to advocate for it or too hard to get it, is damaging to us because of the resentment we hold if we do it that way, and to them because they're not being held to. It's not equitable to let people not, you know, hold up their end of a community's needs without challenging them.
Right.
Let's just challenge in a way that doesn't assume that our need is more than theirs. Yeah, so lots more we could talk about, obviously, on this topic, but I think we covered actually a lot of angles
Yeah.
around chores and how we approach them. I think very similarly, as is so often the case. So let's wrap on this one, maybe, and hope this is helpful for others. If nothing else, you and I got to hang out and chat, which is always fun. And we'll do another one soon.
Cool.
Yeah?
Thanks.
Okay. See you soon, Bria.
Bye, Aaron.
Bye.